His sledgehammer crashed through the pool tiles as sirens wailed in the distance. Karen stood at the fence, her face twisted with rage. Phone pressed to her ear. "Yes, officer, he's destroying property. This is vandalism." But what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that David had been planning this moment for 3 years. Ever since the night he discovered the truth about his wife's accident, the pool had to go. And Karen, she was about to learn why you should never threaten a man with nothing left to lose. David Martinez wiped the sweat from his forehead as he hefted the sledgehammer over his shoulder. The mid-July sun beat down mercilessly on his suburban backyard, turning the pristine blue pool into a shimmering mirror that reflected nothing but lies. 3 years, 3 goddamn years, he'd stared at this pool every morning while drinking his coffee, remembering Sarah's laughter echoing off the water. Remembering the last time she'd been alive, the first swing sent spider cracks through the decorative tile border. The second swing shattered a section completely, sending ceramic shards into the chlorinated water with satisfying splashes. Each impact reverberated through his bones, through the ground, through the perfect facade of Maple Street. "David, what the hell are you doing?" The screech came from directly behind him. He didn't need to turn around to know it was Karen Pemberton from next door, probably hanging over their shared fence like a vulture. Her voice could cut glass on a good day, and today wasn't a good day for anyone. He lined up for another swing. The hammer connected with the pool's built-in spa, cracking the fiberglass shell with a sound like breaking bones. "I'm calling the police. This is vandalism. You can't just destroy property." Now David did turn around. Karen stood pressed against the chain-link fence that separated their properties, her perfectly manicured nails gripping the metal so hard her knuckles had gone white. At 52, she maintained the kind of artificial perfection that required constant vigilance, highlighted hair always in place, makeup applied even for yard work, clothes that screamed "eye shop," where poor people can't afford to breathe. The air behind her, David could see her husband Pete working in their garden, pointedly ignoring the commotion. Smart man. Pete had learned years ago that Karen's battles weren't worth fighting. "It's my pool, Karen." David's voice came out flat, emotionless. He'd perfected that tone over the past 3 years. "My property, my choice. But, you can't just, there are neighborhood standards, property values." "What will people think?" David almost laughed. What would people think if they only knew what he'd been thinking about for the past 1,000 nights? Lying awake, staring at the ceiling, putting together pieces of a puzzle he'd never want to solve, he turned back to the pool and swung again. This time he aimed for the diving board, the expensive curved platform Sarah had insisted they install. "For when we have kids," she'd said, running her hand over her still flat stomach, "they'll love it." The diving board cracked down the middle. "That's IT. I'm calling 911. Karen's voice had reached that pitch that made dogs howl. David heard her, stomping across her lawn, probably heading inside to grab her phone and make good on her threat. Let her call. He had permits. Well, he'd have permits soon enough. The demolition company had assured him the paperwork would be retroactively approved once they explained the situation, but Karen didn't know about the permits, just like she didn't know about a lot of things. The sound of sirens reached his ears before he'd managed to destroy the pool's filtration system. 2 squad cars pulled up in front of his house, their red and blue lights painting the neighborhood in alternating colors of authority and chaos. David set down the sledgehammer and waited. Officer Janet Chen stepped out of the first car. David knew her from the accident 3 years ago. She'd been the one to gently tell him that his wife was dead, that the car had skidded off Riverside Drive during a rainstorm and plunged into Miller's Creek. Professional, compassionate, thorough. Behind her came Officer Rodriguez, younger, eager, hand resting on his radio like he expected this suburban demolition project to turn into a high-speed chase. "Mr. Martinez," Officer Chen called out as she approached the backyard gate. "We got a call about property destruction. From Karen Pemberton, I'm guessing." David gestured toward his neighbor's house, where Karen now stood at her front window, peering through the blinds like she was conducting surveillance. "That's right. She says you're vandalizing your own pool. Is that illegal now?" Officer Ch expression didn't change, but David caught the slight twitch at the corner of her mouth. She'd dealt with Karen before. Everyone in the neighborhood had dealt with Karen before. "Mind if we take a look at what you're doing?" David stepped aside. Gesturing toward the partially destroyed pool, water sloshed around broken tiles and chunks of concrete. The diving board hung at an odd angle, connected by only a few stubborn bolts. It looked like a war zone, which was appropriate, because that's exactly what it was. Any particular reason? You're tearing it down, Rodriguez asked, pulling out a small notebook. Seems like a waste. My wife would kill for a pool like this. The words hit David like a physical blow. Your wife would kill for a pool like this. If only Rodriguez knew how accurate that statement was. I don't want it anymore, David said simply. Officer? Chen studied his face with the kind of intensity that came from years of reading people's lies and truths. Mr. Martinez, you have any permits for this work? I will. Demolition company says they can fast-track the paperwork. But you don't have them now. No. Before Officer Chen could respond, Karen came marching across both lawns, her phone still clutched in her hand like a weapon. She'd changed into what David privately called her battle outfit, a crisp, white blouse, and navy slacks that made her look like she was running for city council. Officers, thank God you're here. He's been out there for hours, destroying everything. The noise, the mestis, is a respectable neighborhood. Mrs. Pemberton, Officer Chen said with a kind of patience that suggested this wasn't their first interaction. Mr. Martinez is working on his own property. But the property values, the homeowners association specifically states, Are you part of an HOA? Rodriguez asked. David no Karen's face flushed red. Well, there should be one. Someone needs to maintain standards around here. David felt something snap inside his chest, like a cable that had been stretched too tight for too long. 3 years of Karen's complaints about his grass being too long, his car being parked 6 inches over some imaginary line, his failure to maintain the community aesthetic now that Sarah wasn't there to care about such things. Karen, he said quietly, shut the fuck up. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the birds seemed to stop chirping. Officer Rodriguez's pen froze halfway through a sentence. Officer Chen's eyebrows rose slightly. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Excuse me, Karen finally managed. You heard me for 3 years. You've complained about everything I do or don't do. My wife is dead, Karen. She's been dead for 3 years, and all you care about is whether my lawn meets your standards. That's not he, never said. You said plenty. You told Mrs. Patterson that I was letting the neighborhood go. Complained to the mail carrier about my car being parked in my own driveway. You called code enforcement because I didn't rake my leaves fast enough last fall. Karen's face had gone from red to pale in the span of 30 seconds. I was just trying to, and now you're calling the cops because I'm tearing down my own pool on my own property. David picked up the sledgehammer again. Well, here's some news for you, Karen. I don't give a damn about your property values. I don't give a damn about your neighborhood standards. And I sure as hell don't give a damn about your opinion. He turned back to the pool and brought the hammer down on the concrete steps. The impact sent vibrations up through his arms, but it felt good. It felt like progress. Sir, Officer Rodriguez said, stepping forward, we're going to need you to stop until you get the proper permits. David froze, the hammer halfway through, another swing. Are you serious? I'm afraid so. Without permits, this could be considered unlawful destruction, even if it is your own property. City ordinances require fuck city ordinances. Mr. Martinez, Officer Chen's voice, carried a warning. Don't make this harder than it needs to. B. David looked at the pool, at the destruction he'd barely begun, at the years of rage and grief that still needed an outlet. Then he looked at Karen, who was standing behind the officers with a satisfied smirk on her face. Fine, he said, setting down the hammer. I'll get your permits. Thank you, Officer Rodriguez said, closing his notebook. Once you have the proper paperwork, you can destroy whatever you want. The officers started walking back toward their cars, but Karen wasn't finished. She never was. I hope you understand, David, that this kind of behavior affects all of us. Sarah would be ashamed. The words hit him like a physical blow. Sarah would be ashamed. 3 years of keeping his mouth shut, 3 years of swallowing. His rage and his suspicions, and his growing certainty that Sarah's death hadn't been the accident everyone thought it was. Don't you dare, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Don't you fucking dare mention my wife. Karen took a step back, finally reading the danger in his eyes. But her mouth, as always, moved. David's hands shook as he poured his third cup of coffee at 5:47 a.m. He hadn't slept again. The kitchen window faced Karen's house, and he'd spent most of the night watching her lights go on and off. On and off, like she couldn't decide whether to run or fight. The manila folder sat on his kitchen table, thick with 3 years of investigation that had consumed every spare moment and most of his savings. Phone records, credit card statements, surveillance footage from traffic cameras. Witness statements he'd tracked down himself when the police had closed Sarah's case as an accidental death. His phone buzzed. A text from Rodriguez Construction, permits approved. Emergency demolition authorized. Crew arrives 8 a.m. David smiled for the first time in months. By 7:30, he was in his backyard, laying out orange safety cones and preparing the area. The morning air carried the scent of honeysuckle and the promise of another scorching day. Perfect weather for digging up the past. David, he turned to find his next-door neighbor from the other side, Mrs. Chena Fisser, Chin's mother, he'd learned. During one of their brief conversations over the fence, she was 83, sharp as a tack, and had lived on Maple Street longer than anyone. "Mrs. Chen, you're up early. Couldn't sleep. Too much excitement yesterday." She peered at the destroyed pool through thick glasses. "When you'd finally do something about that pool, ma'am." She stepped closer to the fence, lowering her voice. "I knew your Sarah, David, sweet girl. She used to bring me vegetables from your garden." Mrs. Chen's eyes fixed on his with surprising intensity. She was scared of something those last few months. "Did you know that?" David's coffee mug slipped from his hand, shattering on the concrete patio. "What do you mean? She would come over sometimes just to sit on my porch and talk, always looking over her shoulder, always checking her phone like she was expecting." "Bad news." Mrs. Chen glanced toward Karen's house. "She asked me once if I'd noticed anyone watching your house." "Watching our house who?" "That's what I asked her. She wouldn't say. Just said she'd made a mistake a long time ago, and now someone wanted her to pay for it." The sound of heavy trucks rumbling down Maple Street interrupted their conversation. Rodriguez Construction had arrived 3 trucks, a small excavator, and enough equipment to level a city block. David felt his pulse quicken. "Mrs. Chen, did Sarah ever mention Karen Pemberton?" The old woman's expression darkened. "Once, she said Karen knew things about people, private things. Said Karen collected secrets, like some people collect stamps." Before David could ask more questions, Juan Rodriguez climbed out of the lead truck, hard hat in hand and a clipboard tucked under his arm. He was a compact man in his 50s, weathered by decades of construction work, with a no-nonsense attitude, of someone who'd seen every kind of demolition job imaginable. "Mr. Martinez, we're here to tear down your pool." "That's right. How long will it take?" Juan surveyed the backyard, taking in the partially destroyed pool, the landscaping, the proximity to neighboring houses. "Depends on what we find. Sometimes these old pools have surprises underneath." "What kind of surprises?" "Old foundations, septic lines. Sometimes people bury things they don't want found." Juan's eyes met David's. "Your wife's accident? My cousin Mike was one of the paramedics. That night, he said something always bothered him about that crash." David's heart stopped. "What do you mean?" Mike said. "Your wife's car had front-end damage, but the tree she supposedly hit didn't have a mark on it. And her injuries, they weren't consistent with hitting a tree at that angle. Why didn't he report it?" "He did. Got told the case was closed. Don't make waves." Juan lowered his voice. "But Mike's got a good memory. He remembered seeing your neighbor's car that night, about half a mile from where your wife crashed." David's vision blurred. 3 years of suspicion, 3 years of investigation. And now concrete evidence was falling into his lap like pieces of a puzzle he'd been trying to solve in the dark. "You sure about this?" "Mike doesn't lie, and he's been carrying this around for 3 years, wondering if he should have pushed harder." Juan glanced toward Karen's house. "The funny thing is, he tried to find that woman to ask her what she saw that night. But every time he knocked on her door, she pretended not to be home." The sound of a screen door slamming made them both turn. Karen stood on her back porch, dressed in a bathrobe and sunglasses despite the early hour, even from 50 feet away. David could see her hands shaking. "Gentlemen," Juan called to his crew, "let's get started." The excavator roared to life, its diesel engine drowning out any possibility of conversation. David positioned himself near the fence line where he could watch the demolition and keep an eye on Karen at the same time. The first scoop of the excavator's bucket tore through the pool's shallow end, revealing layers of concrete, rebar, and 3 decades of suburban secrets. Water drained in muddy rivulets across the lawn, carrying with it the chlorinated dreams of summer barbecues and children's laughter that would never come. By 9 a.m., they'd exposed the pool's foundation. By 10 a.m., they'd uncovered something that made Juan wave the excavator to a stop. "Mr. Martinez, you need to see this." David approached the edge of the excavation. At the bottom of what had been his pool, partially buried under the concrete foundation, was a metal box about the size of a briefcase. What is it? Don't know, but it's been here a long time. Concrete was poured around it, probably when the pool was first installed. Juan looked up at David. "When was that?" 1987. The previous owners had it built. "Who were the previous owners?" David's mouth went dry. "The Pembertons. Karen and Pete owned this house before we bought it in 2018. Significance of that revelation hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. Karen had owned David's house. Karen had built the pool, and Karen had buried something under it before selling the property. "Should we call the police?" one of Juan's crew members asked. "Not yet," David said, his mind racing. "Let's see what's in the box first." Juan climbed down into the excavation with a crowbar. The metal box was corroded but intact, its lock long since rusted away. He worked the crowbar under the lid and applied pressure. The box opened with a screech of protesting metal. Inside were documents, lots of them, protected by plastic bags that had kept them mostly dry despite 3 decades underground. David's hands trembled as he lifted out the first bag. Through the clear plastic, he could see a birth certificate. But not just any birth certificate, one that had been altered. The name had been changed from Karen Pemberton to Karen Williams. The second bag contained a driver's license that had expired in 1986. The photo was definitely Karen. But the name was different. Karen Elizabeth Hartwell, the third bag made. David's blood run cold. It was a newspaper clipping from the Dallas Morning News. Dated August 15, 1985, hit-and-run driver sought in death of local teacher. The article described how 26-year-old Maria Santos had been struck and killed while crossing a street in downtown Dallas. The driver had fled the scene. Police were looking for a woman driving a red Ford Mustang. The license plate had been partially obscured, but witnesses had provided a description. Blonde hair, early 20s, wearing sunglasses. Despite the late hour dot at the bottom of the box was a set of car keys attached to a red keychain shaped like a Mustang. "Jesus Christ," Juan whispered. David's phone was in his hand before he'd made a conscious decision to call anyone. But instead of dialing 911, he found himself calling Officer Chen Martinez. "What's wrong?" "I need you to come to my house now and bring Detective Morrison if he's available." "What's going on?" David looked across the excavation site toward Karen's house. She was no longer on her porch, but he could see her silhouette behind her kitchen window watching. "I found evidence about Sarah's death and about something that happened a long time ago in Dallas." There was a pause. "We'll be right there." As David hung up, he heard the sound of a car engine starting. Karen's BMW backed out of her driveway faster than was safe for a residential street. Through her windshield, David could see her face pale, panicked, and guilty as hell. "Should we stop her?" Juan asked. "No need," David said, watching the BMW disappear around the corner. "She'll be back. People like Karen always think they're smarter than they are." He was wrong about that. Karen Pemberton was exactly as smart as she appeared to be. Smart enough to have killed Maria Santos in 1985 and gotten away with it. Smart enough to have changed her identity and moved to a new state. Smart enough to have built a pool in her backyard and buried the evidence of her crimes underneath it. And smart enough to have killed Sarah when Sarah somehow discovered the truth. What Karen wasn't smart enough to realize was that David had been planning this moment for 3 that every demolished tile, every broken piece of concrete, every official permit and legal demolition was part of a larger plan to expose her. She also wasn't smart enough to realize that running now would only confirm her guilt. As police sirens approached Maple Street for the second time in 2 days, David stood at the edge of the excavation holding evidence of 2 murders. The first had gone unsolved for nearly 40 years. The second had been written off as an accident, but both victims were about to get the justice they deserved. Karen Pemberton's carefully constructed life was about to be demolished. Detective Morrison arrived 20 minutes after the patrol cars, his unmarked sedan pulling up behind the growing collection of police vehicles that had turned Maple Street into a crime scene. David watched from his kitchen window as Morrison surveyed the excavation site, his weathered face betraying nothing. At 6, he'd worked the Sarah Martinez case 3 years ago, had been the one to rule it an accidental death, despite David's protests. Now he stood at the edge of the excavated pool, holding evidence bags containing Karen's buried secrets. 30 years, Morrison said, examining the newspaper clipping through the plastic. Maria Santos. And now you know why, David said. Morrison looked up at him with eyes that had seen too much. The fake IDs, the car keys, the newspaper clipping could be planted evidence. No, I didn't, and I still don't have enough evidence to reopen that case. Morrison sealed the evidence bag and handed it to Officer Chen. But this Taoist thing, this is different. Karen Pemberton really is Karen Hartwell. Then she's been running from federal charges for 4 decades. Morrison pulled out his phone. I'm calling the FBI. While Morrison made his call, David found himself staring at Karen's empty house. The BMW was still gone, but something felt wrong. Too easy. Karen had run, but people like her didn't just disappear without a plan. Mr. Martinez, Officer Chen, approached, notebook in hand. We need to talk about your wife's accident. It wasn't an accident. Chen stopped writing. Mike Vasquez, the paramedic. You know him. He's my brother-in-law. Good man, reliable witness. She looked toward Karen's house. Officer Chen's expression hardened. Who told him to drop it? Before David could answer, his phone rang. Unknown number? He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. David Martinez. Hello, David. Karen's voice was calm, controlled, nothing like the panicked woman who'd fled an hour ago. I imagine you're feeling pretty proud of yourself right now. David's blood ran cold. Where are you? Somewhere safe. Somewhere I can watch the circus you've created in my neighborhood. Your neighborhood. You murdered Maria Santos in 1985. You murdered my wife 3 years ago. This isn't your neighborhood anymore. Do you know why Sarah called me that night? Found out about you. The words hit David like a physical blow. What are you talking about? Sarah was investigating you, David. Did you know that? Check her laptop, David. Check her browser history. Check her email. She was going to leave you. Around him, the police officers had stopped their work and were listening to his side of the conversation. She found out about Chicago, didn't she? Karen continued. About what really happened to your first wife. The world tilted. David's first wife, Alina, had died in a car accident in Chicago 8 years ago. A rainy night, a slick road, a curve taken too fast. He'd been driving. He'd been the only survivor. Elena's death was an accident, he said, but his voice sounded hollow even to his own ears. Was it? Sarah didn't think so? The one that showed you'd been drinking. That night. Officer Chen was staring at him now, her hand moving slowly toward her radio. So she called me that night, asked me to meet her, said she needed advice about what to do. The voice took on a mocking tone. Poor Sarah. She thought she was married to a killer. She had no idea she was asking another killer for help. You killed her. I saved her from you, just like I saved Alina from you 8 years ago. The confession hit David like a freight train. You were in Chicago. I was everywhere you were, David. I've been watching you for 8 years, waiting for you to slip up, waiting for you to give me a reason to finish what I started. Detective Morrison was gesturing frantically at the officers around him, to get them to trace the call. You see, David, I don't just collect secrets. I collect justice. Maria Santos in 1985, that was a mistake, a moment of panic. But Alina in 2017, that was justice. She was going to leave you, take half your money, ruin your life. I simply accelerated the inevitable. You're insane, am I? I gave her a choice to disappear quietly or face the consequences. She chose to be a hero. David's vision blurred with rage. You ran her off the road. I gave her a push in the right direction. Physics did the rest. Why? The silence stretched out so long that David thought the call had dropped. When Karen spoke again, her voice was different. The line went dead. David stood in his backyard surrounded by police officers and construction workers. But her words echoed in his mind like a curse. Alina, Chicago, insurance policies, drinking and driving. David looked around at the faces surrounding him. Officer Chun's expression had shifted from sympathy to suspicion. Morrison's hand was resting on his handcuffs. The construction workers were backing away slowly, sensing the change in the atmosphere. Am I under arrest? Not yet. Karen had played him perfectly. She'd let him find the evidence, let him expose her crimes, knowing that his wife's investigation into his past would surface during the investigation. She'd confessed to 3 murders over the phone, but she'd also implicated him in Elena's death. And the worst part was, she wasn't entirely wrong. David had been drinking the night Elena died. He had taken out a life insurance policy on her. He had been driving too fast on that rainy curve, but it had been an accident. A terrible, tragic accident that had haunted him for 8 years, hadn't it? I need to see Sarah's laptop, he said. Mr. Martinez, if you want my cooperation, I need to see what Sarah found. I need to know what she discovered about Chicago. She returned 5 minutes later carrying Sarah's laptop. The screen unlocked, revealing a desktop background of their wedding photo happier times. When they'd both believed in forever, the browser history made his blood run cold. Sarah had been researching him for months before she died. Elena Martinez, obituary. Chicago police reports. In her email, he found correspondence with a private investigator named Robert. Officer Chun's brother, David, realized with growing horror. The pie had been thorough. He'd uncovered David's financial problems before Elena's death, his drinking habits, his increasingly volatile behavior, but the final email in the chain, sent the day Sarah died, was the one that destroyed him. Mr. Martinez, the pie had written, I've completed my investigation into your husband's background. While I cannot definitively prove criminal intent, the evidence suggests that Elena Martinez's death was not accidental. I recommend you contact the Chicago Police Department immediately. For your own safety, do not confront your husband with this information until you have spoken with authorities. She'd called Karen instead, looking for advice from a neighbor she trusted, and Karen had killed her for it. David closed the laptop and looked up at the officers surrounding him. I didn't kill Elena, but you were drinking that night, Morrison. Said it wasn't a question. Yes, and you had financial problems. Yes, and you took out a life insurance policy on your wife 6 months before she died. David's silence was answer enough. As the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, David realized that Karen had achieved the perfect revenge. She'd confessed to 3 murders, but she'd also destroyed The interrogation room at the county detention center smelled like stale coffee and broken dreams. David had been sitting in the metal chair for 6 hours, his wrists raw from the handcuffs. Detective Morrison sat across from him, a thick file folder between them like a barrier of accumulated evidence. Chicago PD is reopening Elena's case, Morrison said, opening the folder. They're very interested in your insurance policy. $200,000 is a lot of motivation for murder. I didn't murder my wife, but you wanted to. Wrapped around a tree on Lower Wacker Drive, the driver's side crushed beyond recognition. Blood alcohol content was 0.12. You were legally drunk. David, your wife died because you chose to drive while intoxicated. It was an accident, was it? Or did you see an opportunity and take it? Before David could answer, the door opened and a woman in an expensive suit walked in. She was tall, elegant, with silver hair, and the kind of confidence that came from winning cases other lawyers couldn't touch. Detective Morrison, I'm Angela Hayes, Mr. Martinez's attorney. This interview is over. Morrison looked up, annoyed. He hasn't asked for a lawyer. He doesn't need to ask. Hayes set her briefcase on the table. My client has some information that might interest you. What client? Hayes smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Karen Pemberton. The words hit the room like a bomb. David stared at the lawyer in shock while Morrison's hand moved instinctively toward his service weapon. Karen Pemberton hired you, Morrison asked. She did, and she's prepared to make a deal. What kind of deal? Hayes opened her briefcase and pulled out a manila envelope. My client is willing to provide a full confession to the murders of Maria Santos and Sarah Martinez, along with detailed evidence of her crimes, in exchange for immunity from prosecution in the Elena Martinez case. David's blood turned to ice. What? You see, Mr. Martinez, my client has been documenting your activities for 8 years. Financial records, everything needed to prove that Elena's death wasn't an accident. Morrison leaned forward. What kind of recordings? Phone calls between Elena and David in the weeks before her death? Hayes pulled out a small digital recorder. Would you like to hear? She pressed play. David's own voice filled the room, drunk and angry and 8 years younger. You think you can just walk away? Take half my money and disappear? I'll see you dead before I let that happen. Elena's voice, scared and shaking. David, you're scaring me. Please, just calm down. I'm done calming down. I'm done pretending this marriage means anything. Maybe it's time for an accident. The recording stopped. David felt like he was drowning. This was recorded 3 days before Elena died, Hayes said. My client was conducting surveillance as part of a separate investigation when she happened to capture this conversation. What separate investigation? Morrison demanded. Karen Pemberton is a private investigator, detective. She's been working under various identities for 40 years, tracking down criminals who escaped justice. Elena Martinez had hired her to investigate David's business dealings. She suspected him of embezzlement. The lies came so smoothly that David almost believed them himself. But he knew the truth. Karen was no private investigator. She was a killer who'd spent 4 decades perfecting her craft. Elena never hired. She did, Hayes interrupted, pulling out a contract, signed and notarized. Elena Martinez hired KP Investigations on January 15, 2017, to investigate possible financial crimes committed by her husband. David stared at the contract. Elena's signature looked real. The notary stamp looked official. But he knew it was all fabricated, just like Karen's identity, just like her entire life. My client discovered that David had been embezzling money from his construction company to pay gambling debts. When Elena found out, she threatened to expose him. That's when he decided to kill her. This is insane, David said. Hayes pulled out another documented bank statement showing David's gambling losses in the months before Elena's death. $43,000 lost at Chicago's riverboat casinos in 6 months. Elena found out, didn't she? She was going to leave you and take you for everything in the divorce. The bank statement was real. David remembered those nights on the riverboats, desperate to win back money he'd already lost, drinking away his guilt and his fear. Elena had found out 2 weeks before she died. Detective Morrison Hayes continued. My client is prepared to testify that she witnessed David Martinez deliberately accelerate into that tree. She has photographs of the accident scene that show evidence of premeditation. What photographs? They showed David's car approaching the curve. Elena's hands pressed against the dashboard in terror. David's face behind the wheel comm, determined, calculating dot, except none of it had happened that way. David remembered that night, clearly the rain, the argument, the moment of panic when he'd lost control. These are fake, David said. Are they? Enhanced surveillance equipment can capture amazing detail these days. My client was following you that night as part of her investigation for Elena. Morrison studied the photographs with the intensity of a man trying to solve a puzzle. Why didn't she come forward 8 years ago? Because she was operating under a false identity at the time. She couldn't risk exposure. But now that her cover has been blown, she's willing to cooperate fully, creating evidence, forging documents, building an ironclad case against him. Every piece of evidence Hayes produced looked real because Karen had had years to perfect it. What does she want? Voluntary manslaughter for Sarah Martinez with a recommendation for time served plus probation. In exchange, she'll provide everything needed to convict David Martinez for first-degree murder in Elena's death. She's a vigilante, Hayes corrected. Someone who spent 40 years tracking down killers like you and making sure they faced consequences. Morrison closed the file. I need to discuss this with the DA, of course, but detective time is a factor here. My client is prepared to disappear again if this deal isn't accepted within 24 hours. And if she disappears, all her evidence against Mr. Martinez disappears with her. After Hayes left, David sat alone in the interrogation room, staring at his reflection in the one-way mirror. He had been gambling. He had been drinking. He had threatened Elena Dot, and that night, in that split second when the car started to skid, he'd made a choice. Not to murder her, but not to save her either. He'd let physics and momentum and 40 years of accumulated rage do what he didn't have the courage to do himself. The door opened and Officer Chen walked in, carrying a cup of coffee and a look of professional sympathy. Had written, "Sarah never hired me to investigate you for Elena's death. She hired me to investigate Karen Pemberton. She suspected Karen was stalking your family. Check Sarah's real computer, the one hidden in the basement behind the water heater. She was building a case against Karen, not you." David looked up at Officer Chen. "How long have you known?" "Since yesterday. My brother's been investigating Karen for 3 years. Ever since Sarah hired him, he found evidence that Karen Pemberton has been using multiple identities across 5 states, always targeting men who'd lost their wives in suspicious accidents." "Then why am I under arrest?" "Because Karen's evidence against you is convincing, and because sometimes the guilty and the innocent get tangled up together in ways that are impossible to separate." Officer Chen sat down across from him. "My brother thinks Karen killed at least 7 women over the past 40 years, all wives of men she suspected of domestic violence or spousal murder. She sees herself as an avenging angel. You may not have planned to kill your wife, but you didn't try very hard to save her either." The truth of that statement hit David like a physical blow. He'd been carrying guilt about Elena's death for 8 years, but he'd never admitted the darkest part of that guilt, the moment when he'd had a choice between saving her and letting her die. And he'd chosen to let her die. What happens now? Now you have a choice, and she'll disappear before anyone can prove she's a serial killer. David closed his eyes, thinking about Sarah, about Elena, about Maria Santos, about all the women who died because of the choices he made. The abandoned warehouse on the south side of town had been David's choice for the meeting. 3 stories of rusted steel and broken windows, surrounded by empty lots and the kind of silence that swallowed screams. Detective Morrison had wanted to wire the place with surveillance equipment, but David had refused. Karen was too smart, too careful. She'd spot any kind of setup from a mile away. Instead, David wore a wire, nearly invisible device taped to his chest, broadcasting every word to the unmarked van parked 6 blocks away. Morrison and his team would have to trust that David could keep Karen talking long enough to get a confession. David arrived first, as planned. Here years ago, pigeons nested in the rafters, their cooing echoing in the vast space like whispered conversations between ghosts. He didn't have to wait long. Karen walked through the main entrance at exactly 8 p.m., dressed in black jeans and a leather jacket, looking more like a suburban soccer mom than a serial killer. But David could see the predator in her movements, now the way she scanned the room for exits, the way her hand stayed close to the bulge in her jacket. That was probably a gun. "Hello, David." "Karen." She stopped about 20 feet away, far enough to run, close enough to shoot. "I have to admit, I'm impressed. Most of my targets never figure out they're being hunted until it's too late." "How long have you been doing this?" 43 years. Maria Santos was my first, but she wasn't my last. Tell me 18. 18 wives who died because their husbands were cowards, killers, or both. 18 women who never got justice until I gave it to them and their husbands. Oh, most of them are still alive. Prison tends to be harder on wife killers than death. They get to spend decades thinking about what they did, surrounded by men who don't appreciate crimes against women. Karen's eyes glittered with satisfaction, though a few had accidents. Prison can be such a dangerous place. David felt his stomach turn. You orchestrated that too, when necessary. Justice takes many forms. David, sometimes it's a long fall down concrete stairs. Sometimes it's a shiv in the shower. Sometimes it's 40 years of nightmares before the evidence finally surfaces. What about Sarah? What justice was she getting? Karen's expression softened, almost becoming human for a moment. Sarah was collateral damage. I never intended for her to die. I just wanted to scare her away from you, but you killed her anyway. She wouldn't listen. She'd figured out too much about my past, about my methods. She was going to expose me before I could finish what I started with you. Karen shrugged, so I had to improvise. You ran her off the road. I gave her a choice. Drive away from this town and never come back, or face the consequences of protecting a killer. She chose poorly. David's hands clenched into fists. She chose to trust the police instead of a vigilante murderer. The police. Karen laughed, a sound like breaking glass. They would have done the same thing with yours if I'd killed you 8 years ago. No, David, the police don't care about justice. They care about closing cases. And you care about what? Playing God. I care about balance, about making sure that men like you pay for what they've done. Karen took a step closer. Do you know how I found you? Enlighten me. Alina hired me. Not to investigate your finances. That was a lie, I told the police. She hired me to kill you. The words hit David like a sledgehammer to the chest. What? Your wife was terrified of you, David. Terrified of your drinking, your gambling, your threats. She tried to leave you twice, and both times you threatened to kill her if she went through with it. You never, what? Never grabbed her by the throat and slammed her against the kitchen wall. Never told her that if she left, you'd hunt her down and make her disappear. David's vision blurred. Those fights, those awful drunken fights where he'd said things he didn't mean, threatened things he'd never do. But Alina had believed him. Alina had been so scared of him that she'd hired someone to kill him. She paid me $50,000 to make you disappear, Karen continued, half up front, half on completion. But then I started watching you, started studying you, and I realized something interesting. What? You were going to kill her anyway. I could see it in the way you looked at her, the way you planned your routes home from the casino, the way you'd purchased that life insurance policy. You were building up to it. I wasn't, so I decided to let you do my job for me. I watched and waited, and sure enough, 3 weeks later, you got drunk and drove your car into that tree with Alina in the passenger seat. It was an accident. Was it, or did you see an opportunity and take it? Karen pulled out a small digital recorder. Would you like to hear what Alina said about you the night before she died? She pressed play. Elena's voice filled the warehouse, scared and desperate. He's going to kill me, Karen. I know he is. He's been planning it for weeks. Please, you have to help me. What did you tell her? David asked. I told her to run, to disappear that night, and never come back. I told her I'd handle you after she was gone, but she didn't run. No, she believed in marriage vows, in working things out, in the goodness of people who didn't deserve her faith. Karen's voice turned bitter. She went home to pack her bags, planning to leave you the next morning. But you were waiting for her, weren't you? Drunk and angry and ready to end it once and for all? David remembered that night with crystal clarity now. Alina coming home late, her face tear-streaked, her hands shaking as she'd tried to explain where she'd been. The fight that had followed, the accusations, the threats, and then the drive. Alina begging him to stop, to pull over, to let her out. Of the car, this was the only way it was going to happen. I killed her, he said quietly. Yes, you did, but not the way you planned. You wanted it to look like an accident, and it did. Until you decided to get revenge for a woman who'd hired you to kill me. Justice has a sense of irony, doesn't it? Karen pulled a gun from her Jaquita small .38 revolver, the kind of weapon that was easy to conceal and impossible to miss. With that close range, Alina paid for your death 8 years ago. It's time I delivered what she purchased. The police know where I am. Do they? I don't think so. I think you came here alone because you're tired of running from the truth. I think you want this to end as much as I do. Karen was wrong about the police, but she was right about David wanting it to end. He was tired. Tired of carrying guilt for Elena's death, tired of fighting a war he couldn't win. Tired of pretending he was anything other than what Karen said he was. Before you kill me, he said, I want to know something. What? How many of the 18 women actually hired you? How many of them wanted their husbands dead? Karen's smile faltered for just a moment. That's not important. It is to me, because I'm betting Alina was the only one. I'm betting you've been lying to yourself for 40 years, telling yourself you're some kind of avenging angel, when really you're just a killer who enjoys the hunt. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I, Maria Santos, in 1985, did she hire you to kill her husband? Or were you just a 23-year-old drunk driver who panicked and ran? Karen's hand tightened on the gun. The difference is, you've spent 40 years trying to justify your guilt by pretending you're some kind of vigilante, while I've spent 8 years knowing exactly what I am. And what are you, David? A killer, just like you. The admission hung between them like a challenge. Karen's finger moved to the trigger, but she didn't fire. The difference between us, David continued, is that I stopped after one. You just kept going, telling yourself that each new victim was justice, when really it was just you feeding your addiction to murder. Shut up. How many were just convenient targets for a woman who'd discovered she enjoyed killing? All of them deserved what they got. Did they? Or did you just need them to deserve it? Karen raised the gun, pointing it directly at David's chest. It doesn't matter now. You're going to die for what you did to Alina, and the world will be a better place without you. Maybe, but before you pull that trigger, you should know something. What? David smiled, and for the first time in 8 years, it was genuine. You're right. I killed Alina. I've been carrying that guilt for 8 years, and it's been destroying me from the inside. But you know what, Karen? You did me a favor. It's what? Are you talking about you gave me a chance to make it right? To stop running from what I did and face the consequences? And in doing that, you revealed yourself for what you really are. David pulled out his phone and pressed a button. The warehouse filled with the sound of their entire conversation playing back every confession, every admission, every detail of Karen's 40-year killing spree. You've been broadcasting for 20 minutes, David said. The police have everything. They need to put you away for the rest of your life.